Caleb, the man who never gave up on the promiseth journey of a lifetime throughout human history. Some names stand out not only for their achievements, but for the strength of their faith, for their resistance against time, and for their ability to stand firm when everything around them collapses. Among these names is Caleb, a man who lived in one of the most turbulent periods of biblical history, a man who walked through the desert for decades, who saw an entire generation disappear, and even so, never abandoned the promise he received. To understand Caleb, we must go back thousands of years, to a time when the people of Israel were leaving slavery in Egypt and walking toward a land promised by God. This is a story of faith, perseverance, and courage that crossed generations. The world Caleb lived in, the people of Israel had been enslaved in Egypt for centuries. They built cities, worked under oppression, and lived without hope of freedom. Then Moses appeared. Under his leadership, Israel left Egypt in one of the most powerful biblical events, the Exodus. It was in this context that Caleb lived his youth. He grew up witnessing miracles, the sea opening, manna falling from heaven, God's presence guiding the people through the desert. These experiences shaped who he would become. Unlike many around him, Caleb learned to trust the call to a decisive mission. Years after leaving Egypt, Israel reached the border of the promised land, Canaan. It was time to evaluate the territory. Moses chose 12 men, one from each tribe, strong men, leaders, strategists. Among them was Caleb, representing the tribe of Judah. They explored the land for 40 days, and what they saw was extraordinary: fertile land, rich soil, productive fields. But they also saw massive walls, powerful armies, and men of terrifying size, giants. The moment that defined a generation. When the spies returned, the people waited anxiously for the report. 10 spies spoke fear. They said victory was impossible, that the enemies were too strong. But 2 men spoke faith. Caleb and Joshua declared that God would give them victory. They called the people to courage, but fear spoke louder. That night, the people cried, complained, and wanted to go back to Egypt. That was the moment everything changed. Because of unbelief, that generation would not enter the promised land. Only 2 men would enter, Joshua and Caleb. 40 years of waiting, imaging, carrying a promise for 40 years. 40 years walking in the desert, seeing friends die, burying family members, and still believing the promise would be fulfilled. Caleb lived through all of it. He did not abandon his faith. He did not rebel. He waited. And while many complained, he trusted. The alliance with Joshua. During those decades, a powerful friendship was formed. Joshua and Caleb were not just allies. They were survivors of faith. They had seen the impossible happen, and they knew God does not fail. When Moses died, Joshua became the leader, and Caleb stayed by his side. Not seeking fame, not seeking power, but seeking to fulfill the promise. Entering the promised land after decades of waiting, Israel finally entered Canaan. Battles were fought, cities were conquered. Then came the moment to divide the land. Caleb approached Joshua and reminded him of the promise made decades earlier. The impossible request. Caleb was about 85 years old, but he said something extraordinary. He declared he was still strong enough to fight. And he asked for the hardest land. Hebron. The land of the giants. Not the easiest land, not the safest. The most difficult. This was not pride. It was faith. The battle for the promise. Caleb fought the descendants of the Anakim giants. The battle was not only physical. It was spiritual. It was the final test of a lifetime of faith. And he won. Hebron became his inheritance. The end of an extraordinary life. The Bible does not describe Caleb's death, but it describes his legacy. He became a symbol of perseverance, true faith, absolute trust in God. A legacy for all generations. God's story crosses centuries because it speaks to something universal. Waiting, trusting, persevering. He proves that promises may take time, but they do not fail. Faith can survive time, and it is never too late to conquer what God promised. Imagine the desert at sunset, an old man looking at the mountains of Hebron, the wind touching his face, and the certainty that every step, every pain, every weight was worth it. That was Caleb. Not just a warrior, but a man who lived a promise. If this story touched you, you need to watch the story of Joshua, the leader who guided Israel to victory. Like the video, subscribe to the channel, share this story,